The program for government commits the government to establishing New ERA, which they have recently announced. The intention is to raise €2 billion for infrastructural investment. They intend to do this by stripping the assets of public enterprises in order to add to the assets of public enterprises. I don't get it either, but that's not important. That's not the focus of my discussion. I think that eventually the New ERA will disappoint. First off, I just say this, it is not privatization or partial privatization of public enterprises is not mandated by the EU-IMF Memorandum of Understanding. How do we know this? Because we have actually read the Memorandum of Understanding and not just taken the word of ministers blindly. Secondly, the amount of money that New ERA will eventually create will probably be minimal. It won't make a dent in the fall of €30 billion in investment since the crisis began. For our visitors, €30 billion is approximately 20% of GDP. In addition, it has been shown that privatization or partial privatization, certainly in the energy and telecom areas throughout Europe, actually leads to a reduction in investment, because reduction in investment, especially in R&D, gets diverted into shoring up shareholder value. So you may actually find that you have no net investment increase after this process. And I think that many of the job creation claims based on Department of Finance employment multipliers, which I'll get to later, are not necessarily applicable to commercial projects for public enterprise. That being said, New ERA at least puts the idea of investment back up on the agenda, no matter how minimal and confused. So in that sense, you can say it's a step forward. However, it has come under considerable attack by influential economists and commentators who have opposed the idea of investment in principle. They claim it has no long-term effect, that its effects are only temporary and short-term. They say there are no such thing, or very little multipliers in a small open economy, and any benefit will leak out. And then they say this is something that the state is not competent to do. It's a diversion from repairing public finances. It's a waste of money. Blah blah blah. Essentially, they treat investment like a narcotic. You know, you get a bit of a hit, but afterwards it gets out of the system, and you're back where you started from. This is the thing I want to take on today in the next few minutes, and just leave you with one idea about investment. First off, what is it? Investment is merely the creation or upgrading of an asset to generate income in the future. New revenue flows, reduced expenditure. In other words, we spend today to earn tomorrow. But the key point there is it creates a new asset or upgrades an old asset. And it's more than just bricks and mortars. Indeed, we heard one aspect of that from Kieran. But it not only involves physical infrastructure, it involves human capital. Human capital, what's that? People's education and skills. Public services, business investment, and issues of health, life quality, and living standards. So public investment in its broadest sense encompasses all the economic, social, and communal activities that we get up to. And all of these things are identifiable, measurable, and quantifiable. Investment has a multi-layered effect. The first activity occurs around the creation or upgrading of the asset, which is the production process, such as the activity that goes around, say, building a bridge is the simplest example. You build a bridge, you have all this activity, jobs being created, materials being sourced, and all that. The second activity is around the use of the new or upgraded asset, which is the consumption of that asset. So that's usually divided between what's called the demand side impact and the supply side impact. Now, it is here where there's a lot of deliberate distortion by those who are opposed to the issue of investment, because what they do is they merely look at the short-term impact. Now, we see this from the Department of Finance. We see that €1 billion in a job creation project will, through capital project, will create between 8,000 and 12,000 jobs. But of course, once that activity is done, those jobs, in one sense, go away, at least those jobs that are directly created. Again, we see this from the short-term economic impact of Lane Benetrix. 1% GDP temporary investment in capital investment. Even in Ireland, small open economy, as you can see, it rises in the second year and then tails off. So even the money that comes in and sloshes around will eventually leave for 6 years. And this is the point that the critics try to exploit. However, there is the long term, the supply side, what you do when you consume the asset, when you use the asset. And this is what the ESRI said. The supply side impact is the sustained increase in GNP when the investment has been completed. It may take some time before the completion of the investment, before the full supply side benefits are complete. It is the long term, the supply side impact, that is the key measure over the term. And what they did was they measured both the demand and supply side impact of the last NDP, National Development Plan. Now, this is a good example to use, first off, because it includes both physical infrastructural investment and social, investment in public services. It's also interesting because at this stage, the economy was over capacity. We were coming up against all sorts of constraints. So you might have thought that actually in a small open economy that's at full capacity, this shouldn't work. But if we see in the columns, that's the activity, the short-term activity of creating the different assets. And it tails off at 207 to 213, it tails off at the end of the NDP, which is going to last for 6 years. However, if you see the supply side, it rises, falls, but then it starts increasing so that by 2020, 13 years after the beginning of the program, the long-term sustained impact is actually continuing to rise, and it will continue to rise and stay in the economy for years after. So that is the supply-side potential. What are some of the supply-side potentials of investment? Well, pre-primary education is a particular one. That is something that stays with the economy for as long as the child lives, up until the age of 70 or 80, and passes it on to the next generation. Next generation broadband, that's a no-brainer. Retrofitting buildings to the highest conservation capacity. I won't go on, but I do want to mention music literacy, because my colleague in Unite, Tony Moriarty, has been done a lot of research on music literacy, and the studies find that if you teach a child a musical instrument when they're very young, actually the spillover effects are quite positive. They are not only better, they do better in other classes, but also particularly they get aptitude for science and math. Well, we know about what we need in the future going forward. So this, again, is something that stays with you the whole time. I mean, the fact is, a lot of people have been saying, oh, there's no multipliers in the Irish economy. What's amazing is studies have been done for years, both models and analysis of our national development plans, and they all seem to be coming in pretty much the same thing. This is a table that I took from the TASC pamphlet Stimulating Recovery. It was an article by Michael Burke. And actually, even back in 1978, the central bank was showing how multipliers work by going back to 1960 and looking at them in 5-year tranches. So this idea that multipliers don't exist and that there's not a positive benefit from fiscal shocks in the economy is wrong. Let's be clear, investment is not a traditional stimulus program whereby the government temporarily boosts demand until such time as the private sector gets back on its feet. It has the characteristics of that, but what it is it constitutes a major drive to modernize our economic base and boost productivity. It is this process that will increase growth, job numbers, and profitability throughout the private and public sectors. And how much time do I have? 2 minutes. Okay. Now, there are legitimate criticisms of investment programs. There are criticisms and queries, and I think we have to positively engage with those. I mean, questions have been asked. Do we have the capacity to engage in what can be called artful fiscal planning, to integrate short and long-term impact programs, capital and labor-intensive, domestic and import-dense programs? Do we have that political capacity? Do we have the institutional capacity to adopt best practice evaluation techniques, transparency, accountability, etc. There are institutional challenges and there are programmatic challenges, but they can be overcome. But let's be clear. Those people who are attacking and deliberately distorting what investment programs about are not interested in engaging in, legitimate discussion and criticism and debate. They have a deep-rooted ideological hostility to the very idea of popular and democratic intervention into the economy. And it's not just about investment. They have an ideological hostility to the universal welfare state. They have an ideological hostility to workers and their representative trade unions and the bargaining power in the labor market. It forms part of a whole. I won't get onto that. Just so I will conclude, and what I've done is I've just taken that first black thing, the first black line there, that's the supply side from the ESRI NDP program. Well, if that's doing such a good job, when that starts running out of steam, you have a second investment program. to further modernize, to further boost your productivity. And then when that goes, you have a third program that takes you out to 2030 and beyond, a program which I call permanent investment. And that's why I conclude that investment is an act of solidarity, an economic, political, and social act. It actually involves people today in what I would call a national drive of economic and social asset building rather than asset stripping. And it's also an act of solidarity with the next generation, with our children and our children's children, because we are building assets that they will be able to use and improve upon. And it's that type of new roadmap to Irish recovery which I would submit for consideration to the conference. Thank you.